Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode. Wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on, as always, thank you guys so much for the support, the kind messages, emails, tweets, all that great stuff that you've sent me or the show's way. Keep those coming. And as always, thank you again for joining us here for this episode. You know, this is a topic that I see come up a lot on my social medias feeds about coaches who are either really proud of their team for playing to its fullest potential, or a lot of times I see also coaches asking questions about, hey, how do I get my team to play harder, or play better, or they're underachieving or underperforming? What tips or advice do you have to kind of help us get on track? And so I thought this was really good to bring as an episode topic because it's definitely something I see a lot of conversation about. So what we're going to do today is talk about the idea of pushing your team to its fullest potential, pushing kids hard, pushing teams hard, and how to really make sure that you're maximizing the most out of the players that you have. So really excited to get into this. Of course, I never do this alone. I'm very happy to be joined by an individual who is all over the coaching world and pretty much it seems coaches year round, whether it's the high school, AAU, club, training, kind of doing it all. Very happy to be joined by Coach Tom Letellier today. Coach, really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. How are things going?
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the invite. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Very busy, but always grateful to carve out some time to talk to, a fellow hoop head. So thank you for making the time for me as well. I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome, Coach. Let's start with you personally and your basketball journey and your coaching journey. I know it has so many different stops that you have and so many different things you're currently doing. So let's talk about your coaching journey, where it began, and where are all the places you're at right now.
Sure. So I like to view my start in coaching kind of starting as a player, right? So, I was a kid that it wasn't uncommon to see me down at a local park, shoveling snow off the park outside and trying to get a workout in wherever I could. I would spend many, many hours in the spring and summer months playing under the lights with a lot of my friends. And I feel like I was kind of the last generation that still, played outdoors. A lot of kids I feel like I see working out indoors with trainers and stuff like that. But, my start was really on the pavement and I feel like I gained a lot of valuable lessons out there and I established some grit. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the passion for the game really started for me. Coupled with my experience playing AAU and having a lot of great coaches that helped steer me along the way. And I really think it stems back to that because I think anybody who carves out time in their lives to give back to players via coaching, has to have a very good foundation in terms of passion for the game. So for me, I started playing basketball very, very young. I always found it as something that was therapeutic for me. I had a lot of stressors as a child. I came kind of to basketball with some baggage, I think more so than a lot of my peers did. We don't need to get too far into the details on that, but I had a real appreciation for basketball because it gave me a separation from some of the other things that I was dealing with in my personal life.
Sure.
And I think that's honestly helped me in terms of my ability to, bring people together and coach, because I understand what it's like to have distractions outside of basketball and to not have, everything figured out and all the pieces together. Right. So I'm able to relate to a wide spectrum of individuals. So I try to take this approach everywhere I go. I'm grateful that I kind of got into the coaching scene through an email and a phone call that, I reached out to the director of the Middlesex Magic, Mike Crotty, who's a former coach of mine, really informally kind of just trying to gauge his level of interest and maybe have me come on staff to coach, a couple AAU teams. I was grateful that he took me on, without any prior coaching experience. He
Mm.
kind of gave me my start, which I was grateful for. I always thought very, very highly of Mike. He's very well renowned in the local and national hoop scene. So, I viewed that as a real honor to be able to, step back into the program that once gave so much to me. And I take that seriously, as I feel all coaches should. And then I think from there, I also reached out to another former Magic coach of mine who runs Gold Standard basketball training. His name's Chris Giordano. He's now the head coach at Chelmsford High School in Massachusetts. Another really, really coveted basketball mind, just super brilliant. Someone that I look to as a friend and now a colleague, and someone that I once looked up to as a kid too, right? So I view both Mike and Chris through a similar lens, and they really gave me my start in this coaching thing, right? So, I started with the Magic. I think I was coaching a seventh grade team, if I'm not mistaken. And then I started doing some training stuff with Chris. And from there, I started really taking on like 2 or 3 teams in the AAU seasons. And I got really immersed in that. I started thinking of ways for me to get, involved in the winters. So I saw a bunch of vacancies opening up. After I had already established myself a little bit on the AAU scene, I threw my name in the hat for a bunch of different vacancies, and something stick over at Neshoba Regional High School, where they took me on as a JV coach. So I was working with Mike McCurry at the time, and he was the varsity coach over there. And, we had a really, really good rapport, and it was a really good place to be. A lot of great kids, great families. So I was there for one season, and then, I really wanted to continue working my way up in terms of, hopefully gaining some sort of varsity spot, where now I'm at Concord Academy. We're Class B in the NEPSAC. We're kind of building our basketball culture a little bit. We took on a more, I would say, rigorous schedule than we've had in the past, but I'm grateful to be a part of that program. It's now my second season there, working with Coach Hollins, who's the owner of Boston Elite Basketball, former player at Brandeis. I try to, pay homage to all the people that have enabled me to be part of their programs, whether it's training, AAU, or high school, because they're all people that, I value as individuals, and also people that I'm learning from, So
Absolutely.
I would say that that's a pretty good snapshot as to how I entered the coaching world. And I guess the story's still being written.
I think that's such a cool part of that story in particular, is that the idea of just kind of putting your name in the hat like you spoke about, right? And just kind of being willing to, go somewhere and get that experience, and make sure that you get that foot in the door, so to speak. And not only that, but to, still have such meaningful connections with individuals after all these years. It's just pretty amazing what the game of basketball can do in terms of building those relationships with people that just stick around for a lifetime, as it seems, once they're established.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the end of the day, you're working with people, right? So,
Yep.
And I try to keep that at the forefront of everything I do when I'm coaching. You could spend a lot of times talking about strategy, X's and O's, and so on and so forth. But, if you don't have an ability to engage with the people that you're working with, whether it be fellow coaches, administration at whatever school you're at, or even your players, right? Your X's and O's are only going to take you so far. So I've always been, big on relationships. And I think that that's a real pivotal piece to how I try to approach the game.
Love it. Speaking of on this topic, I wanted to ask you about this idea of non-negotiables, and I think that's something that, as coaches, as we build our relationships with our players, and we build, our culture, so to speak, with our players, we think about those things that we won't tolerate, those things that absolutely, have to be happening, or can't be happening. And I wanted to ask you specifically about what are your non-negotiables as a coach, for the players or the programs that you've worked with, and how did those end up getting established?
Awesome. Yeah. Great topic. So I think for me, I have to understand my role within each organization, right? So obviously my situation at Concord Academy right now, I'm an assistant varsity coach, and I need to be mindful of the fact that I'm supporting the head coach, right? Every other experience that I've had coaching, I've been the head coach, whether it was JV at Neshoba or with the Magic or, running camps for Gold Standard basketball training. I've typically always been, the person that's at the forefront doing things, my way. Whereas Concord Academy, I have a little bit of a different role. I definitely say it's collaborative in nature for sure. But my job is to support, the philosophy and ideology of Coach Hollins. And I think I do a pretty good job at that. We're very like-minded in many ways as well. So it lends a hand to that. But, for me, if it's my approach, I view it kind of as a funnel, if you will. So we start very broad at the top, and then you can really drill down into all of these overarching, themes, if you will, whether it relates to rebounding, defensive strategy, how we move the ball on offense, how we move without the ball on offense, and we could go on and on.
Mm-hmm.
The big overarching topics that I view as non-negotiables are, really all centered around energy, right? What does your body language look like? How are you communicating with people that are around you? Because, I'll spend a lot of time talking to my teams. Even at the first practice, I try to lay some of this stuff out, because if you're not laying out expectations early, it's extremely difficult after the fact to then go back and try to police those things. So I think consistency and being, very upfront is important. But I think while doing so, your players have to know that you care, and that you're not just, being hard on them for no reason, right? They want to know that you're invested, that you care about them as individuals, not just as basketball players, right? So, I'll spend time talking a lot about energy being contagious, right? Whether it's positive or negative, whatever you put out into the world, whether it's basketball or not, people are going to have some sort of interpretation, some sort of feedback with that. So I think from a basketball standpoint, when I'm coaching younger athletes, it's really important that they understand that the way they communicate matters, the way they conduct themselves, the body language, their approach to the game in terms of being selfless, right? Whether it's defensively or offensively. I can't stand the brand of basketball that's now, let me come down, hunt a shot, 8-10 dribbles, and we settle for the first thing we see.
Yeah.
So I try to really ingrain selflessness into everything that I'm doing. And I think that that's really the biggest cornerstone. So, the non-negotiables for me, I can't have any teammates chirping each other in a negative fashion. If that does happen, we got to talk about it in real time, which may or may not lead to individuals or the team running, right? And I try to use running as a way to kind of police these things. And it's not because I enjoy making kids run. It's actually my least favorite part of coaching, right? But there's just certain things that if you want, a team individually as at the player level, or collectively as an entire team, if you want them to succeed, you got to lay out the foundation as to what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not. Because at the end of the day, they're kids and they'll take it as far as they want to, right?
Yes,
And
yeah.
I don't mean to come at it with an iron fist, because I really care about the kids, but I also know I was the type of kid I needed structure. If I didn't have structure, it didn't work well for me, right? And I think that goes back to what I was experiencing outside of basketball. So I keep that in the back of my mind too, as to what I felt would kind of work for me. And I know when coaches were hard on me and I didn't have that relationship with them, it wasn't as well received. But if I respected the coach and I respected the relationship that was there, I would run through a wall for that coach, regardless of how much they ran me, regardless of how hard they were on me. And I try to relate back to me as a player, because I think having that full, focus, being at the player level, you're able to then, as a coach, tend to those players in a better way. So I think that kind of, speaks to the non-negotiables at a very high level. And then, we could drill down into strategy from there.
Yeah. Yeah, but absolutely, as you mentioned, though, the idea of making sure that the non-basketball culture parts are in there, right?
Mm.
And you talked about like the selflessness and the way that they work and the way that they communicate and get along with each other. Yeah, like you have to build definitely from there before I think you can focus on any of the basketball stuff. Those bigger picture items first, and
Agreed.
I absolutely agree with that. That lends itself well into this idea now of talking about pushing your team to its fullest potential. So I wanted to
Mm.
ask you about that process of getting your team to buy into being pushed hard. How do you kind of lay that groundwork so that players know what the expectations are? And then
Sure.
also, how do you kind of lay that groundwork where players are going to be expected to be pushed really hard and that they're like open and wanting to be pushed to that level?
Sure. For me, right, I think it's really, really important. Two things, I guess. It's very important to know that you can work hard and have fun at the same time, right? So I'm the type of guy, I'm all about camaraderie, smiling, laughing, high fives, all that good stuff, right? What I don't like is when it crosses over to that line where my practices or the games are now becoming a social hour and we're not focused, right? So I try to really early on embed in my teams that, we're able to work hard and have fun at the same time. And you'll actually notice that when we're doing that, we're going to win, which then doubles down on us having fun, right? It's never a great experience when you're losing, right? Especially when you're losing to teams that may not be as skilled as you, but they're just more disciplined, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I think having that, at the forefront of these discussions with the kids is super important. Um, and I also think, you know, I try to relate it to something that's bigger than basketball, right? So if you're all about me, and you're not so much about we, that's not going to help you in the real world either. Everything you do is going to be, collaborating with a team in one way, shape, or form. Even if you're an entrepreneur, you have to work with, other entities and other parties effectively, right? So I think when we create this, like I have to go get mine type of mentality in basketball, it's really counterproductive for the game, for the team that you're working with, and then also the kids after they leave the game, right? And I think for me that's the most important thing because I was a kid that I felt like I could have taken basketball further, but as I alluded to earlier, I had a ton of distractions, and I think as a young man I didn't understand necessarily the ramifications of some of the decisions I was making and how I approached the game. And it kind of put a ceiling on me, which I felt could have been a little bit higher if I had done some things differently. So for me, again, I try to make that so all of my players are able to hit their ceilings right where they are and not lower them prematurely. But oftentimes I also try to get my guys to go above their ceilings or what they think that may be. Because I hate leaving stuff on the table, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's really, really important too to discuss with them because then they understand that I'm invested in them and they understand that they should be invested in me because of how much I care, right? So that's a big thing with me.
And out of curiosity, with that process, how do you?
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a hard thing to scientifically nail down, but how do you almost
Sure.
kind of see or determine what your team's potential are? How do you kind of evaluate like where it is that they're at and where it
Mm,
is that you think they can go? What is that process like?
okay. It's definitely a case by case type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, I feel like I hear a lot of times, um, I hear coaches talking about what they don't have, what they need, right? And they're not so focused on what's in front of them. And in the process of focusing on, what they need or what they don't have, they're not bringing out the most of what's there and what's tangible and touchable right in front of them. So for me, I look at each team and I say to myself, all right, these are the strengths, these are the weaknesses. What can I do to structure my practices to enhance both? What can I do to in my coaching philosophy to bring out the best in both of those categories or to minimize the negatives from the areas that they're not so great at, right? So I think having a really, really good understanding of the personalities down to, the skill sets is super important. And I think sometimes we focus so much on the skill sets that we lose track of the personalities too, right? I really try to do a good job, building relationships with my kids and my players and their families, even, right? I try to view it as kind of like a holistic approach to coaching. So you really got to get into the real granular level where you're looking at every single piece of the equation and we're not focused on the end result of the equation. We're focused on the process and everything that leads up to what might be that end result. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, if that end result's not winning, but I know everything systematically leading up to that end result was where it needed to be, I feel like I won and I feel like I did everything that I could. And I bet my players feel the same way.
And I think that that's one of the hardest things I think sometimes for coaches to accept is
Mm,
is is they I think as much as we try not to, I think it's so easy to get caught up in wins and losses and how the season
Agreed.
ended or what that last game was like, and define our success by the scoreboard rather than what we were able to get out of our teams. And I think that
Absolutely.
we're able, and this includes myself as well, to kind of take a step back and look at success as the process of getting better and what we were able to get out of our teams. I think we might have a lot more happier coaches and a lot more coaches who stay in this than maybe we do right now. Maybe a little bit
Sure.
less stress than normal. Um,
Mm,
but I think it's a good point to focus on what you have, and I think leading to what I just said about what we as coaches kind of fall in the trap in, right, is focusing on what we don't have or what we need rather than
mm,
working on what's in front of us, because there's certain things obviously we can or can't change. And once we have our players, and it sounds like for you as a coach, like you don't worry about all these other like what if scenarios that aren't happening, and you just kind of focus on
right.
what you have in front of you and the task at hand.
And I think that that's crucial, right? Because what's in front of you is what's in front of you. It's up to you to determine how you're going to respond to what's in front of you, right? So, but you kind of, and all of these things that I talk about, I feel like they feed into one another in one way, shape, or form.
Hmm.
So, I talk about energy being contagious. If I'm the coach that's, constantly feeling, doom and gloom, I'm sitting down when we're down 40 as opposed to coaching my team to the final buzzer. If I'm the guy that's pointing fingers or saying I need X, Y, and Z and I don't have X, Y, and Z, that fuels into players' confidence. That fuels into their relationship with you. And how do you expect them to perform to their fullest potential if that's their outlook as to, your strategy? And all they're doing is reciprocating your energy, right? So, yeah, very, very good point.
And yeah, and to that point of what you mentioned, players are very perceptive, and they know
Mm,
when you've as a coach have kind of like thrown in the towel, right? Or kind
yeah.
of just said, and it's like, all right, well, if coach is done coaching, coach isn't working hard anymore, then what am I supposed to be doing, right? Like
Mm,
they emulate kind of that sort of thing. So no, I
absolutely.
100% agree. What does it look like then tangibly to push kids on the court, push them to their potential? Kind of talk us about your practice style and
Hmm.
what it is that you're doing on the court that you think really gets your kids to whatever their max potential may be.
Sure. So, um, I try to have all my players view everything that we do as intentional. There's an intent behind the reason that we're doing this, right? So even if it's as simple as, um, I don't know, like a dribble handoff series or say, a driving kick series, to them, it may seem like, all right, we're going through the motions, right? But when I'm really looking at that analytically and I see kids catching the ball from a really high place, right? And then they have to get low to load their shot to get back up, I view that as inefficiency. Or I see a kid going half speed. I see a kid trying to give off like the persona of the cool kid in layup lines, right? You see them going like half speed with their Euro step, trying to look real clean. And really, that doesn't translate into basketball success. So even when we're doing skill work, or if it's, more X's and O's related, everything we do has to be done at a very, very high level, right? So when you look at teams that may have more skill than us, right? We're already behind that, right? So we have to lower that gap or make sure that that gap doesn't widen
Hmm.
by us doing things the way that we should and continuing to get better day in and day out. And also, the players, they establish what the non-negotiables are too. And I say that to them. I'll put the ownership on them and the accountability on them too. I'll say to my guys all the time, I don't have my feet on the floor. You guys do. I'll help navigate whatever experiences you're dealing with on the floor. I'll give you guidance. I'll give you pointers. But at the end of the day, I'm not here to coach effort and energy. So if you don't have that, then you can't get upset when the result's the result, you know? So um, I think a big piece is you got to put some ownership on the players. And I know that depending upon what age group you're working with, that can be more and more challenging, right? So it's probably easier to put ownership on a high level high school team or a college program, but it can be difficult to do that when you're coaching sixth or seventh grade basketball. But I think it's possible at every level. You just kind of have to scale back how you're doing it, right? Um, So for me, it's really important for the guys to walk away from everything that we're doing, knowing that there's a reason behind it. So I provide a certain level of expectation as well as explanation. Um, so this is why we're doing it this way. This is why it needs to be done this way. If it's not done this way, here's likely going to be the outcome. And and the days snowball, right? So if you don't establish those standards early, and you're 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out, that's now the standard,
Yeah.
right? So it's very not, it's not uncommon for you to come to one of my practices if I'm, the primary head coach, to see my kids stopping a drill within the first 5 minutes of practice, and we're already talking about some of this stuff. It's also not uncommon 20 or 30 minutes in, if I see this continuous pattern, that they're now on the line because they need to understand that I'm trying to get the most out of them. And this is the only way I know how to do that. And I don't want them to run, I want them to run within the framework of us competing. You end up working harder, right? In the long run, running 17s or wind sprints, whatever term you want to use. They end up working harder doing that when they could have just worked hard at the start of practice and then had fun doing that.
Yeah.
So super important, I think, to establish some of those things. And I think it's gone a long way for me. I think when I first started coaching, I was super focused on like strategy and quick hitting sets and all of that stuff, which I think has its place. But I think as I've gotten further and further into this, I've really seen the importance of cultivating the relationships and the standards of your teams and your programs, and then just being able to relate to your guys too. I think that goes a lot further than most coaches think that it does. And I honestly think that X's and O's is a skill that anybody can pick up. But if you don't have the ability to communicate effectively and extract the most out of people, I feel that that's something you really can't learn. You either got that or you don't.
And that's, I think, as coaches, one of the things that, and I know in conversations I've had with people who've gotten into coaching or younger people who really like
Mm-hmm.
basketball, and I'm a teacher as well too, and I think this translates both to
Sure.
basketball. There's people who get into coaching because they like love the game of basketball, just like there's people who love teaching because maybe they love the content they teach. But I tell people, if you
Mm,
don't love teaching kids or you don't love
right.
working with kids, your love of the actual activity itself has to really be
Right.
secondary. And it sounds like for you
Absolutely.
that's kind of the case where it's like, you talked about, anyone could pick up X's and O's, but that idea of loving the kids that you work with and
Yep.
all of the other intangible stuff, all of that has to be done absolutely first, and then you lay the
Mm,
groundwork for all those things you can do in practice. And it sounds like you're very intentional on that relationship piece always being first.
absolutely. I try to and it sounds cliche, and a lot of these things that I say are cliche, but at the end of the day, it's the most important thing. I want my guys to be able to enjoy the game of basketball and take it as far as they possibly can, to use it as a vehicle to be successful. And that looks different for every kid, right?
Yeah.
Um, what bothers me is when you see a kid that could go further than he did, and I need to know that I at least did my part to try to get them to see it from a different perspective, in terms of I just want them to get better as
Hmm.
individuals on and off the court, right? So, like, I said it earlier, my ability to connect with myself as a former player is super important. I think I was the type of kid that I needed direction badly, and I needed somebody that took an interest in me outside of my house. Um, I was an only child. I didn't have brothers and sisters. I had a turbulent upbringing in a variety of different ways. And I really was looking for some sort of external source to bring me a sense of fulfillment and a sense of joy. And really just to serve as a band-aid for everything else I had going on. So I think understanding the role that basketball can play in certain kids' lives is huge, right? To some kids, it's just another way to make friends or to play basketball. So I got to meet those kids there, but I also got to meet the kids that are trying to use this as a means to get through life and or to play college ball, right? So yeah, I think having that understanding is super important.
with the idea of pushing kids and your team to reach its potential, I wanted
Mm,
to ask about how do you maintain consistency and fairness with each player, and what can a coach do to make sure that no player feels like singled out or treated
mhm.
differently, and that every player is held to that highest standard, and everybody is held to kind of a same expectation where players don't feel like, coach has, favorites or is being impartial in any way.
Absolutely. So if I am to use a particular player or a particular play that was made by a certain player as an opportunity for the entire group to learn, I'm going to make it very known that, okay, what you just did is not uncommon amongst everybody else that's here. Everybody else that's here has done this at one point or another. And I'm solely using this as a learning moment for everybody else. It's not to put you on the spot. It's not to make you feel less than. Because as I said, everybody else has done this at one point or another. So
Hmm.
we're here to learn from this. We're not here to cast shame or doubt, right? So then I think when you put that in as a disclaimer at the start of these conversations, it's now not the kid feeling like they're inferior or they have to walk on eggshells or they have to play nervous. It's now collaborative. Like we're going to work together to figure out how we're not going to do this moving forward. And oh, by the way, we're also going to have a plan to do it better the next time, right? So I think when you frame the conversation a different way, you're able to get more out of that conversation, right? But if you frame the conversation as, you're really laying into the kid for the
Yeah.
mistake, now the kid's walking on eggshells, right? And what good does that do for you as a coach if you don't have confidence of your players because all you're doing is breaking them down verbally? So I gotta say, I really try my best to be, stern with the kids, but I need them to know that I care and that there's a reason behind it all, right? Because if I don't have that, I got nothing. And that's really the truth. Um, so it's very, very important that the standards that I set are across the board for everybody, whether you're, our leading scorer or you're the last man off the bench. The standard is the standard. That's it. It doesn't matter, right? But whether I'm talking to the leading scorer or the last man off the bench, there's things that I'm going to be able to take from both of them to enhance the learning of the entire group, right? And it doesn't have to be at the fault of whether it's the top man or the bottom man on the bench, right? It doesn't matter. So I think it's really important to view it from that lens and also, give the kids room to solve problems, give the kids room to squirm a little bit, but in a way that doesn't hinder their confidence.
It is, I think, something that is very, I don't know if it's not talked about enough or something that maybe we don't think about enough as coaches, but the way that we have to be tough on kids and the way that we have
Mm,
to push kids and have to, try and get the most out of them, while at the same time having those players know that we have their back and that we
mm,
care for them. It's such a difficult thing for coaches, I think, to master, because we're asking, basically, I know in my case, like teenagers to
yep,
n- accept that somebody's going to be really hard on them, perhaps really hard on them publicly, and then
yep.
still like maintain their composure and still maintain their like excitement to keep playing. And I think that that's something that coaches have to be really considerate about, like their word choice and the way that
Yep.
they say things and all of that groundwork that gets laid beforehand, because I mean, it's a lot for kids to process being talked to a certain way, while also knowing that it's coming from a place of care and coming from a place of love. I think that is it's that could be real tough sometimes to master that skill as a coach, and I think it's something that can't be understated.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think sometimes, coaches wear the statistician hat too much too, right? So the things that you and I are talking about right now, we can't really quantify down to, you know, a statistic, right? So it's
Hmm.
it's not it's more qualitative, right? So we're talking, we're engaging. There's no way for us to use a metric to determine the success of those conversations, right? So I feel like in sports in general, but even in basketball, the numbers game is so important, right? And I always say to the guys, sometimes the shot's made before it's even taken, meaning, is your confidence, is your head right? if you get a wide open three, but you're quivering, shooting the thing, you might as well just roll the ball out of bounds. But we don't look at it as coaches as I facilitated that fear in that player based upon the way that I conversed with them, right? Or how I framed the conversation, right? So we'll get 2-3 weeks, a month into the season, and we're wondering why little Johnny is 0 for 15 from the free throw line or so on and so forth. But we're not looking within as to why that kid may be doing that, right? And it may not be the coach. It may not be. But I think in some instances, there's so much to be said about the stuff that we can't put into a number, a metric. It's just dealing with people is super, super important, and it's completely under discussed in sports.
Oh, I've definitely been there where I've had a player who, you know, shoots, gets the ball, and I could just tell by her body language, like, oh,
Yeah,
that's got no shot. And then I think, like, why? Like, it works on it all during practice, and
right.
puts a lot of time in. But then I think to myself, like, why does this player not have this confidence? Like, where is it not coming from? And if they don't have confidence, what have I not done as a coach to make her feel confident? Like, I have to think of like what I can control. Like, they're, and that gets to a lot of self reflection on my part. Like,
Sure.
if there's a confidence issue with a player, then it's something, to me, I feel like is in my control where I can do something about that. And if she doesn't have that confidence, then in my mind, there's something I've either said to that player or maybe not said to that player to
Mm,
make her feel that sort of way. And I think that as coaches, we definitely need to look inward when we have players maybe playing too tight, too unconfident, too nervous.
mm.
There's something missing there as coaches that we probably need to be doing or not be doing to kind of unlock that kid's ability more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and I don't know if it's because I'm a younger coach, right? I'm not even 30 years old. So when I look at this, I'm looking at it still with, a youthful perspective. So I think too many coaches are spending time, throwing their hands up in the air saying, oh, I did everything I could. Or on the other end of the spectrum, they're saying, I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything. Right. And I think it leads to this, like, this viewpoint internally within the coach that they're not doing a great job. And then that kind of snowballs a little bit too. The coach got to be confident too. The coach has to, uphold all of the standards that you're conveying to the players in a
Yeah.
way, right? So I think when you're not at your best and you're beating yourself up and you're taking the losses hard and you're doing all these things, you're hurting not only yourself, but you're hurting the team a little bit too. So I think, we have to just be mindful of sometimes that is the best that we can do. And sometimes that's
Hmm.
okay, right? We tend to become perfectionists. Um, and we want to, we're control freaks too, I think naturally. We try to control every aspect, every facet of every game, every practice, every personality. And that's just not attainable sometimes. So I think we need to be more, kind to ourselves too as coaches sometimes because, there's been many, many times where I've gone home after a frustrating practice or a frustrating loss. And I've sat with that for hours on end, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
it's
we let that
because,
sit with us. Yeah.
yeah, and I think, if you change the perspective on that, that's a beautiful thing because you're that invested in what you're doing that it's bothering you to that extent, but you can't let it consume you, you know?
Well, and I think when it does, or if it does start to, fester, consume you, that's very likely that bleeds over into your practice. It bleeds over into
Agreed.
your own body language. And next thing you know, you're kind of poisoning the well of your team with your own, thoughts that you're stewing in or marinating
Mm-hmm.
in. And next thing you know, your culture is kind of taking this hit in this dip because you as a coach haven't let things go. And, I think we like to talk about our players having, a next play mentality or shake it, move on. Well, I think as coaches, we got
Absolutely.
to we got to make sure we're doing the same, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That's very true.
So on a basketball perspective, more on that X's and O's side, I wanted to ask you about what are you able to kind of run on the court when you see your team is willing to be pushed to its fullest potential? What are you able to kind of do, as I mentioned, from that X's and O's standpoint, when you
Mm-hmm.
know that your guys are able to kind of give you everything that they got?
Sure. I try to be a less is more type of guy. I try to teach kids how to play, not how to run plays, right?
Hmm.
Um, that's not to say that we don't have structure in some of the stuff that we're doing, but I really like letting kids, especially in the AAU scene, I really like letting kids kind of have their freedom to make reads and attack and struggle with some of the decision making and the problem solving that goes on in the heat of the moment of a game, right? But with that, you have to then, teach the kids as to what reads they should be making, when you curl off of a screen, when you should reject a screen, those are just some examples. So there's the IQ component,
Yep.
but there's also an understanding of how willing is the kid to do these things. Right. So sometimes, there's ego at play, especially as you deal with, older kids sometimes. What is their willingness to take this guidance and then try to apply it? So you got to have that type of, dialogue going on in your mind too. And that goes back to understanding your players. But for me, if I know I have a bunch of guys that are ready to do things my way, right, unselfishly, in the best interest of the team, it's going to look like quick ball reversals. It's going to look like less dribbling, more movement without the ball. It's going to look like us sprinting our lanes in transition and getting out and running, using our defense as a catalyst to create some easy buckets. And then I may even be able to, do more things defensively, right, than I could with a team that's not willing to do these things. If you have a team that's not playing gritty, I'm probably not going to feel as confident having them pick up full, right? Like I love to have my guards pick up full and just to deter the ball from getting up the court in, 5 seconds, right? I like eating up some clock a little bit. Things like that. I like increasing the tempo of the other team's play because I think that also, will influence some bad decisions and that'll lend a hand to us playing well. But then, you look at it offensively. If a team is willing to make those same commitments, as we just talked about defensively, the ball's going to be moving more freely. We're going to be more open to identifying, when the help defense collapses, for example, and when we should get to 2 feet, kick out, when we should be cutting hard, right? I try to establish a rule. If you're in the same spot for 2 to 3 seconds, it's time for you to move, whether it's an off-ball screen or a basket cut, right? So these are some of the things that I'm looking for and I'm looking to try to instill in my teams. But they got to meet me halfway on a lot of this stuff because a lot of this stuff requires more effort than maybe what they're used to.
Yeah, and if your team is willing to work and willing to be pushed, then to your point, you can do a lot more of free flowing decision making, have players kind of make reads and make decisions because they're probably more willing to like learn about what's supposed to be happening and how to play the game versus being robotic and mechanical. I imagine teams that have that buy-in and are willing to put that max effort are probably also the players that are the most likely to want to learn about the game and want to be the best player they can and learn the why behind things, which has to make it so much better for you as a coach when you have a team of players like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when you get caught up in the, the robotic style of basketball, like you have to pass here, then you screen here, right? It becomes rigid to the kids. They don't like rigid, right? And I think at the end of the day, at any level, they're going to get to a point where they're going to have a coach who's, they're going to be running their sets and you have to do your job. But then again, in any of those given sets, regardless of where you go, what does it look like when the set doesn't work and now you got 20 seconds on the shot clock and here we are, we're free play and you don't know what to do, right? So I think regardless of whatever scheme these kids may be going to play, whether it is on in college or it's in their winter seasons when they go to play at their high schools or their travel programs, they need to have an understanding of how to play the game before you expect them to do all of these things within a real rigid framework, right? Because if the rigid framework doesn't work, you have nothing to fall back on, right? So I try to empower my kids to, develop too, right? It's not just to win games, it's to develop throughout the course of the season, have a better IQ than what you walked in the gym with, on day one. When you leave the gym, I want you to be smarter and more capable with the ball, without the ball, on offense or defense. But I also want you to be more confident when you're not playing basketball. You feel an ability to be more vocal, to advocate for yourself, to advocate for others, to uplift people, motivate yourself and your teammates, right? These are all life skills. And I think that that's not talked about enough either because these coaches, they get so fixated on winning, right? But the real win is when you play a role in a kid succeeding, right? And that looks different for every kid. So
Yeah,
I would say that's huge.
and I think I don't want to discourage any coaches who have their sets and have things that they like to run, but I also think that if you want your players to be playing at their best potential, to really maximize what they can do, they have to be given opportunities to make decisions and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes that they make and be able to, adjust based on what they're seeing the other team do defensively, and
Mm,
being able to make those decisions independently on their own, I think does so much for their growth as players. And I know
I agree.
as coaches, we have to live with some of those mistakes and know that if they're going to have the ability to make decisions, they're not always going to make the right one. But I think there's so
Mm,
much more you could do with a team that is given that sort of freedom, and rather than just having strict sets, because and they're just following what you want to do as a coach rather than
right.
maybe their own basketball IQ being developed. And it sounds like that's kind of your philosophy as well.
Yeah, I want my kids to be better players and better people through the limited interactions that I've had with them, you know. And I think it's my job as a coach to kind of foster that on court or off court growth in a way. And I need to do my due diligence to know that I influence that, right?
Yeah.
And I think understanding the game is something that is, I would say, widespread, not discussed enough, right? So we're having kids, do all this stuff, and they're watching an NBA game where Kyrie Irving just dribbled 12 times and Euro stepped through three defenders and then finished in traffic, spinning it off the glass. And now these kids think they can do it, but the kids don't even understand the importance of a jump stop and wanting to get to 2 feet, right? So we have to really, I think, as coaches, we got to dial the skill work back. Sometimes we got to get back to the basics and the fundamentals, and then that's when we can start building on these other things, right? And I think you need to have a good idea of where your team is at currently and where they're heading to. Um, yeah, so I think teaching them how to play is huge, not how to run plays. That's secondary to me.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I wanted to ask you about kind of a little bit of a role reversal here, but
Mhm.
as I'm thinking about this conversation, I wanted to ask for you as a coach, what do you do as a coach to maybe self-reflect or push your own self to your fullest potential? How do you kind of assess where it is you currently are or were at as a
Mhm.
coach, and where it is you want to like keep going to kind of maximize what you're doing for kids?
Sure. Number one, I try to be really honest with myself. Um, and I really believe this, whether it's a skills workout, for Gold Standard, or a practice for the Magic, or what I'm doing in the winter, with Concord Academy, whatever it may be. I try to reflect on what that, hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, whatever allotment of time was. I try to reflect on it and say, okay, what did I do well today? What could I have done better? Right. And it's okay to be honest with yourself if there was some shortcomings in certain areas. I think also identifying your current strengths and your current weaknesses, and understanding that you got to build both of those areas, right?
Hmm.
So I think sometimes when we focus on just our shortcomings and the areas of improvement, we lose track of the things that we're currently good at when they really should be working together in a way. Um, so I think the internal dialogue as a coach, knowing that there's always room for growth, and I view coaching as a constant learning curve. I don't think there's anyone that should be able to say I have this figured out 100%. That's never the case.
I think I've
Nobody's
told
got it figured out. We're learning, right? Just like the players are. We're learning.
I think
Um,
somebody said once that if you think you have it all figured out, it's time to step away. It's time to
very,
move
very
away.
true. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I
Yeah.
think, humbling yourself a little bit in the process too, and knowing that it's okay to make mistakes and that, it's part of your process too, right? I
Hmm.
think in anything that we do, there's going to be peaks and valleys and some highs and lows and a lot of emotions in between. But if your heart's in the right place and you're you know, following that mission with good intentions, you really can never go wrong.
Yeah, and I think that idea of not, like I said, we've talked about this a couple times, not being focused on outcomes, on
Mm,
wins and losses, and always looking to improve. And I think at the same time also sometimes I've been in this boat before as a coach where I'm always dissatisfied, I think, with myself, and I always like focus on, oh, what should I have done, or what didn't I do? And I think that for me, I know that that's been a journey I've been on where I have to
Hmm.
allow myself to, celebrate the things that I'm doing well, and be happy about the things that are going well, because
Mm.
I think it's easy as coaches to kind of get caught up in everything we're not doing, everything that, oh, I wish we'd done that, or regret that, one mistake that we may have made when, 50 other things went well. And I think as coaches,
Mm.
where sometimes we could be too hard on ourselves and expect, perfection from ourselves. And I don't think that's a healthy headspace to be in. And I think as coaches, if we're there for our kids and we're doing the best that we can for them, there's going to be mistakes made along the way, but it's okay to also be happy sometimes with the things that you've done, and be able to think positively about what you do as a coach as well.
Yeah, for sure. At the end of the day, we're people, they're people, right? Coaches and players. We're
Yeah.
all imperfect. The game of basketball is imperfect, right? So I think when you really just keep it simple like that and you focus on those types of things, it's never going to be 100% perfect. And I say this to my guys too when I'm coaching. It may seem like I'm a perfectionist because I get really, detailed on little things, you know, cutting angles, driving angles, the footwork leading up to, a paint touch, right? How we pass the basketball, a bunch of different things that I really try to hammer home. And I say to them, it's never going to be perfect, but my job is to help you get as close to perfection as we can get, right? So I think having them understand that I'm not expecting perfect either, but I'm expecting a certain standard and I'm expecting an attempt to get to perfect. I think that gives us some wiggle room to kind of digest the imperfections a little bit more freely.
Yeah, the that idea of, progress over perfection. And I think
Hmm.
that, having perfect effort, so to speak, is so much more, meaningful than the perfect result. So long as the effort is as close to perfect as possible, then you kind of live with the result as it is. And I like that idea a lot. I think players can sometimes think that, they're going to be benched if they make, a mistake, or they
Oh
shoot a
yeah.
shot poorly, or they miss a layup, or miss a cutter, or something like that. And I think for coaches, I think it's really be really great if we, say that, we understand that these mistakes are going to
Hmm.
occur, but, how can we learn from them? Or I'm going to trust that maybe the next time you're going to make that right read, or hit that cutter, or see that, angle the right way, and not just be like, oh, you made that mistake, out you go, you're being benched, I don't trust you anymore. Like,
Mm.
that, I think, could also lead to players being really tentative or really nervous if they feel like they're going to get pulled if they make, one mistake, or miss one read, or miss something like that. That could also lead to that, nervousness or hesitation that
Hmm.
we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I agree. Regardless of skill level or understanding of the game, as coaches, we got to find a way to empower people, you know, on that spectrum, right?
Hmm.
Of their understanding, of their ability, of their willingness to get better, right? And their work ethic, regardless of what that may look like or where they are on that floating scale. I have to do my best to try to empower them to move along that spectrum, right? In various different ways. So I try to be, mindful of meeting the kids where they're at, but I also try to help them, set up short term and long term goals to get them to where they want to go. And I also try to be realistic with them too. Like, I can't tell you how many times I hear kids saying they want to play college basketball, but they don't understand what it takes to get there. How many times did you shoot around this week? What was your form shooting like? How many makes? And I'll have a kid saying he was in the gym, once over a week or two. Well, that's not a college basketball player's approach at all, right? So, I think you need to be real with them too of, what does that look like, whatever your goal may be, right? And how can we get you there? So if that's your goal, my short-term goal for you is this upcoming week, you need to be in the gym every day, right? If that's
Yeah.
really your goal, and it's okay if it's not, right? But don't say it's your goal and then come up short because you're not willing to do everything that needs to, transpire in between, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree. I mean, that is
Mm,
something that's like, as coaches, we also, as we talked about, have to make sure our players understand, what those expectations are, and what it really means to play at a certain level, or players may not have any idea or may not know, and
Right.
they might not like the answer too when you tell them, right?
Yeah.
How
They
much
chase the
that takes.
label.
Yeah,
That's what they
yeah.
want. They want the label, but they don't want everything that comes with it. And that's, something I see a ton on the AAU circuit too. I
Hmm.
want to play for so and so's team. I want to play on this circuit, and if you don't make those things, it's like a bust. But it's like you don't account for all the unseen hours that the kids on those circuits or the kids on those on those teams are putting in. And then you compound that with their physical capabilities, their approach to the weight room, right? And then God-given talents too, right? Like, let's be honest, if you're 6'8" and can jump out of the gym, there's a better likelihood of you playing at a higher level than so and so that maybe 6 feet tall and can't even move that quick laterally or
Yeah, yeah.
jump that high or. So I think you got to be mindful of all of these things, and chasing the label is a huge part of basketball culture right now, and I try to get even the parents away from it, right?
Yeah.
If that's the label, you got to work to that label. It's not just going to be handed to you off of a place of entitlement, right?
No.
So kids really got to embrace the work.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. And I think that uh it's easy for players to get caught up in things they see on, social media, or things that,
Mm-hmm.
they might, they think, oh, I want to do that, or I know as coaches sometimes we kind of want our players maybe to be at that certain level, and so we, say like, oh, so and so is gonna, play in college, or look at this kid's, tape or whatever, and we kind of gas them up sometimes without maybe letting those players know, like, this is actually how much work you need to do that, or here's
Mm-hmm.
realistically where you actually are. I know sometimes as coaches maybe we get ahead of ourselves on players and try to
Sure.
push players to a certain spot or put them in a certain angle or light that they're not actually realistically ahead as well. I know I've seen that too.
For sure.
Awesome, coach. To wrap up, there's a couple questions I ask every guest, so I'll go ahead, starting with this first one here, which is,
Mm-hmm.
thinking back on your coaching career, what is a moment from your coaching career that you think the listeners here could learn from?
Okay. Um, I would say, when I first started, I was kind of operating, I'd say, more so in generalizations, right? So I would treat almost every player as if they were the same. And
Hmm.
that applies in certain areas, but, you know, the kid that had my background that was going home to difficulties at home or traumas or whatever, you want to put that as, versus the kid who's going home to a happy home, is doing well academically, doesn't have a lot of those roadblocks. Those are two completely different trajectories. And I think when I first started coaching, I was focused on the basketball player and the standards of the team and so on and so forth. And I didn't get to the lower level of why is so and so, adversely reacting to this versus
Yeah.
this player, even if they're more skilled, right? Like I'm start scratching my head. And then when I start, really developing more of the relationship with the player and of the parents and taking it from that approach, that's when I start really kind of, uncovering a lot of the things that individual is dealing with, right? So, we touched upon it a little bit throughout the conversation, but I think it's super important to hammer home. As coaches, we're dealing with people. That's
Hmm.
the most important thing I want people to take away from our talk today. You got to be caring, you got to be understanding, and just understand that we're dealing with people. They're not just players. They're not just X's and O's on your clipboard. They're humans, right? So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I learned early on is you really have to understand who you're working with in order to bring the most out of them. And also do it from a place that's not prying either, right? Um, and I think
Yeah.
that's a challenge too.
Yeah, to that last point that you mentioned, I think that those relationships that you want to build, all of them kind of come in their own at their own time, right? And
Agreed.
there's players that are gonna be really open. I know I've had players who've told me their whole life story in their first
Right.
conversation with them, and I've also had players who are just very quiet, just because, they're to themselves and they're reserved, and little by little they'll open up. And I've also had players who, didn't really open up at all, and then all of a sudden one day it was like 2 years in, it was like they've opened up about all these things. And I think, to
Right.
your point, like, not every player is the same. So not every player wants to open up, can open up, will open up, or if they do, it'll all be at their own moment when they're ready, sort of thing. So I
Absolutely.
like that point as well. Awesome. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I jokingly call a 60-second soapbox, and I'm not going to time you. So if you go over under 60 seconds, that's okay too. But I want to
Okay.
give you a platform here to give out kind of a final thought, a closing message, just something to kind of leave the listeners with, and you can kind of take it in any direction that you want. So, Coach, I'm going to kind of open up this floor to you, and I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay. I spend a lot of time talking to my guys about, watching the game, right? And what does it look like when you're watching the game? What are you watching, right? So, I'll never hear a kid say, "Oh, I went down to watch a local D3 game," but it's like that may be some of the best basketball that you could watch as a developing basketball player. But you spent your evening watching, the NBA, for example. And that's not to, throw shade at the NBA. They're extremely skilled, the athleticism, the talent, all that, that's great. But the style of play that is played in the NBA, it's not translatable to where these kids are trying to go, right? So when you get to a college program, they want you to mindfully dribble and be effective, right? With 2-3 dribbles. They're not looking for you to be Kyrie. And I say that to my kids all the time. No one here is Kyrie Irving. So no one should catch the ball and feel the need to go 1-on-5, right? And also, the floor spacing in the NBA is much different because of the evolution of the perimeter shot. So now you have, 3-point shots being hit at a higher frequency, right? You have more skilled players off the dribble. So it creates more of that ISO one-on-one style of play. I try to tell kids that if your goal is to play at a high level in high school and hopefully go on to play in college, maybe play overseas or even make it to the league, right? All of those players had to play within that style of play at one point or another in order to get those freedoms at the next level. So I try to tell kids, go watch a college game, watch a really good high school game. Don't spend so much time watching, these NBA players because, at one point or another, they were you. And they had to go through those, those check marks on their checklist, if you will, to get to that point. So I think there's just, some inadvertent, almost brainwashing that's going on with the style of play in the NBA. And I think it's important that more coaches are steering their kids to watch, actual basketball, right? And not just, what the NBA has evolved into lately.
Yeah, that idea of watching like the team game and watching it from players who are still really talented, but they're not
Absolutely.
out of this world talent at a level that's just almost incomprehensible, I think, for
Right.
for a lot of players. No, I like that a lot. That's a really good point. I don't know if anyone's really brought that up on their soapbox before. So I love that, Coach. Thank you.
Awesome.
Coach Letellier, again, thank you so much for coming on here, talking about pushing your team to its fullest potential, culture, standards, training, X's and O's, bringing up the watching the game of basketball. So much great stuff that we talked about. Really appreciate you coming on, Coach. Best of luck with everything you got going on. I know you're a 365 day a year coach, I guess 366 this year. So thank you so much, Coach. Really appreciate it. Best of luck with everything you got going on. This was great.
Yeah, thank you too. I really appreciate the platform and everything that you're doing to shed light on, a lot of these things that are going to be big takeaways for coaches, players, and even families, right? Hopefully someone gets some added value from some of the things I said. And, I really appreciate you making the time. Wish you all the best. It's all love. Thank you.
Thank you, Coach. And thank you guys so much for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.